Hi, I'm Lena. I wasn't invited to my own family's annual ski trip again. A decade. A whole decade of frosty silences, strategically cropped photos, and a vacant spot at the dinner table where my name was never uttered. They whispered I was too intense, too focused, too much. But this year, I didn't beg for a place by their fire. I bought the entire ski lodge. So when they trundled in with their skis and forced cheer, and the concierge asked, "Are you on Miss Sterling's guest manifest?" They finally had to acknowledge my name or be left out in the cold. Monday mornings shouldn't hit like an avalanche. Usually, they started with lukewarm coffee, a barely touched energy bar, and an inbox full of work issues I could conveniently ignore until my second cup. But this morning was different. I was neck deep in coordinating a major tech conference when the subject line flared up on my screen, bright, bold, and a punch straight to the gut. Maxwell Family Ski Week 2025. Confirm your spot. My breath hitched. I clicked, a reflex I couldn't stop. Everyone was there. Clara, Ben, Aunt Jo, even Cousin Mark, who'd been off-grid since Y2K. But my name? Nowhere. Not in the recipient list, not in the chain, not even a typo. They hadn't just overlooked me, I was deliberately excluded. I stared at the email, feeling like it had physically struck me. There they were, dozens of replies, inside jokes, reminiscences from last year. Someone even shared a picture of the lodge's great room fireplace, the same fireplace where I learned to toast marshmallows at age 7, long before I understood that love in this family had conditions and a shelf life. I scrolled down, foolishly hoping for a follow-up, a correction, anything. But I knew. This wasn't new. Last year's invite must have gone to your junk folder, Clara had said, her voice dripping with false sympathy when I'd called. Devastated. You know how unreliable technology can be, she'd added with a light laugh, as if my exclusion was a simple system error. I closed the email thread and just sat there. My spacious office suddenly felt suffocating, impersonal. The achievements framed on my wall seemed to belong to a stranger. The Denver skyline, usually so inspiring, felt like a mocking parody. All that ambition, yet a gaping void in my heart. My gaze drifted to my bookshelf, almost involuntarily, and there it was, the little crystal snow globe. It sat on the middle shelf, tucked behind industry awards and a thriving succulent. A Christmas gift from when I was 9. My dad had found it in a small mountain gift shop and told me it was unique, for his unique girl. That was before Clara became his shining star, before he started introducing me to his colleagues as the one who's always swamped with her career. Before I realized that being the younger one didn't mean more cherished, it just meant more conveniently forgotten. You all right? I flinched. Liam was at my door, holding his customary mug of herbal tea. I forced a swallow. Yeah, just some junk mail. He arched an eyebrow. From them again? I didn't reply, just managed a tight smile and turned back to my monitor. But I didn't reopen the conference plan. My fingers hovered, and then I snapped. The laptop shut. The advancement portfolio was still on my desk. Senior director at 37, the youngest ever nominated in the company's history. The position I'd poured my life into, navigating office politics, enduring 16-hour days, and being sidestepped by men with weaker concepts, but stronger golf handicaps. And yet none of it registered with them. To them, I was the one who'd moved too far away, worked too hard, and forgotten where she came from. My phone buzzed. A text from Chloe. Saw the ski trip email. Want a gate crash for the sheer hell of it? My fingers hovered over the reply. Then I typed, or maybe it's time for a more strategic move. I opened a browser tab I'd bookmarked months ago. Luxury property listings, specifically the Mountain Lodge, the lodge where Clara had her engagement photos taken. The lodge where my parents celebrated their 35th anniversary while I was at an international summit they forgot to tell me about. It was on the market, a quiet sale. No family announcement, no group text. The economy had shifted, and they were shedding it like an old coat. I stared at the listing. The sweeping stone fireplace, the panoramic mountain views, the very same armchairs where I'd once curled up listening to my dad read adventure stories, before he started pretending my calls went straight to voicemail. So this was their play. I moved the cursor, slowly, over the contact broker button. My finger hesitated, then clicked. The confirmation from the realtor had barely registered when my phone rang. Same distinctive ringtone I'd assigned her years ago. Same knot in my stomach, tight, expectant, resigned. I didn't need to see. The caller ID. I knew. I let it ring twice. "Hi, Mom," I said, my voice flat, already stealing myself. "Lena, darling," she began, that overly sweet saccharine tone she used when she was about to deliver a blow, but wanted to sound blameless. I didn't wait. "Let me guess. Clara's kids need the master suite this year? Or perhaps Ben's new partner has an aversion to standard hotel rooms." Silence. Long enough for me to picture her examining her perfectly polished nails, searching for the next line in her well-rehearsed script. Then, finally, "You know how it is with the little ones, and we're just so squeezed for space this year." I wanted to laugh, not from humor, but from the sheer, painful predictability of it all. I could have scripted her lines myself. "You understand, don't you, Lena?" she added, her voice soft, almost pleading. "It's just logistics." I remembered that exact phrase from 3 years ago. Same season, same voice. The last time I'd tried to join. She'd called the day before, whispering apologies like last rites. "You understand, don't you?" she'd said then too. "The children need the big rooms." And I did understand. I understood that my presence was always conditional, easily dismissed. The only time I was indispensable was when a bill needed paying. "I understand perfectly," I said now. "Thanks for the update." Before she could reply, I ended the call. But I didn't hurl my phone, I didn't break down, I didn't scream. I simply rose, walked to the kitchen, and poured a glass of ice water with the composure of someone who had anticipated this all along. Back at my desk, I opened a new spreadsheet. My personal assets. The figures stared back, orderly, unwavering, prepared. I tallied my liquid funds, confirmed the maturation dates of my stock options, and scanned the entry labeled discretionary investments. Then I whispered, "All right, game on." 10 minutes later, my phone lit up. Chloe again. "Screenshot incoming." She always gave a heads up. I opened it. A group chat I wasn't part of, naturally. "Clara. Don't worry, Lena said she's not coming. Wants to make it all about her, as usual." Then the replies. A few, "Oh, that's a shame," texts. Several laughing emojis. One from Uncle David. That one always did need to be the center of attention. I stared at it, numb. But beneath the numbness, something else stirred. Not fury, not sorrow, clarity. They weren't just leaving me out. They were actively rewriting my narrative, turning my absence into a fault, my silence into their story. To them, I murmured, "I'm the outlier who chose ambition over connection." But I knew the real story. I hadn't fled from warmth. I had sought refuge from the cold. My mind flashed back to the winter I turned 9. The family was at that very ski lodge. I'd spent an entire afternoon building an intricate snow castle, complete with ice windows and a tiny pine cone flag. The family gathered, impressed. Then Clara stepped forward, planted her own little flag on top, and beamed for the camera. "She's so imaginative," Mom had cooed, applauding. I didn't speak up. Neither did Clara. That night, I cried into my pillow in the tiny attic room while they celebrated Clara's artistic talent downstairs. Back in the present, I reopened the real estate portal, scrolling to the ski lodge listing. No second thoughts this time. I booked a private viewing with the broker. No one had to know. There would be no drama, no preemptive strike. Only action. Quiet, decisive, and final. The next morning, I walked into the Mountain Realty office. A charming log cabin-style building tucked between a ski rental shop and an artisan bakery. A woman with kind eyes and a bright red scarf rose from her desk. "You must be Lena," she said, her voice warm. "I was expecting you today." I nodded. "Thanks for seeing me on short notice." She indicated a chair. It's funny, she said, pulling up the lodge's file on her large monitor. Your name sounds familiar. Any relation to the current owners? I looked her directly in the eye. Yes, but not for much longer. The mountain air was sharp as I stepped into the dim corridor of the self-storage facility. The smell of old cardboard and disuse was strangely comforting, like an old, forgotten song. Unit 117D. I hadn't been inside in nearly 6 years. The lock resisted, then gave with a groan. I heaved the roll-up door upwards, its metal joints complaining loudly. Inside lay relics of a life I'd outgrown. Furniture from my first studio apartment, boxes marked grad school, a stack of mountaineering books from my days of chasing alpine dreams in ill-fitting boots and borrowed gear. In the back corner, covered by a drop cloth, sat the old pine chest. My grandmother's. I dragged it forward, wiping away the years of accumulated dust. The clasp was stiff but yielded to a firm tug. Inside, the faint, familiar scent of dried cedar chips she always kept with her linens. My throat tightened. The first thing I saw was the journal. Deep forest green, with pressed wildflowers glued to the cover in her endearingly imperfect way. I used to gently tease her about it. They'll crumble in a month, I'd said. She'd smiled. Then you'll have to press your own memories onto its pages, dear. Beneath it, a sealed manila envelope, addressed in her elegant, looping script. For Lena. Open only when you've stopped asking for their approval. I sat on the cold concrete floor and tore it open. Inside, a letter and a legal-looking document. The letter was brief, just a few lines. One day you'll understand why this is just for you. True belonging doesn't always come from those who raised you. Sometimes, it finds its way in through unexpected paths. Use this when their silence becomes too loud to bear. I blinked, rereading it. The document was a trust, not a keepsake, not a sentiment. Binding. I flipped through the pages, hands trembling. My name, her signature, notarized. A specific clause. Should the existing deed holders face significant financial distress or neglect property obligations, the named beneficiary reserves the right to enact a complete title assumption. I didn't grasp all the legal jargon, but I understood the essence. And I knew exactly who could clarify the details. By the time I walked into the law firm of Thorne and Associates in downtown Denver the following morning, I was already light years ahead of where I'd been just days before. The receptionist, a pleasant woman named Sarah, offered me coffee while I waited. 10 minutes later, I sat opposite a senior partner, a man in his late 50s with sharp eyes and a folder labeled Trust L. Maxwell Estate. He scanned the pages, letting out a soft whistle. This clause, he said, tapping a line, isn't just solid, it's ironclad. If your parents have defaulted on significant dues or let essential insurance lapse, you don't just have a claim, you have precedence. And if that's indeed the case, he looked at me over his spectacles, then all you need to do is sign this petition. The title will transfer to you within 15 working days unless formally contested. But from what I see here, they wouldn't have a leg to stand on. I let the reality of that sink in. 15 days. The same time frame they'd be packing ski gear and planning après-ski festivities, assuming the lodge was still theirs to enjoy. That afternoon, I sat by my window, her journal open in my lap. I didn't write. I just traced the dried flowers on the cover, my fingers remembering their delicate texture. Then I reached across my desk for the crystal snow globe. It had sat quietly for years, a silent witness, tucked behind financial reports and unread journals. I placed it beside the journal. They belonged together, same quiet strength, same unspoken promise. It struck me then, the symbolism of it all. The snow globe, the journal, the trust clause, all the little things they assumed were insignificant, forgotten. But I hadn't forgotten. They had. I stared at the trust documents one last time before signing. I didn't feel a surge of triumph, not yet, only a sense of preparedness. The lawyer handed me a notarized copy. It's done. The transfer is initiated. They have no clue, do they? I asked softly. He shook his head. They will. Soon. Back home, I opened my laptop and pulled up the listing for the ski lodge again. A new photo had been added. The grand, Entrance decorated with twinkling fairy lights, ready for winter guests. Let them plan their gathering. Let them arrive with their assumptions and their entitlements. Let them raise a toast to family unity on a property they believed was theirs. They forgot to read the fine print that mattered most. I wasn't just reclaiming a property. I was invoking a truth that was already mine. The silence after signing the petition was deceptive, almost tranquil. But beneath it, a current of something I hadn't felt in years began to flow. Agency. The next morning, I brewed a strong dark coffee, opened my laptop, and watched my inbox refresh. A new email blinked at the top. Reminder, Maxwell family ski trip, final confirmations this week. It was from a new address, Clara's personal Gmail. The subject line oozed false warmth, but the email content was a different story. Sweet. Assignments, activity schedules, a link to a shared Spotify playlist, even a family-friendly board game tournament roster. And my name, conspicuously absent. No "Hi Lena," no mention in the thread, not even a casual "hope you can make it next time." But Clara had CC'd everyone else. 5 minutes later, a separate notification. Chloe. Subject: You need to see this. Her message was brief. I know you weren't included again. She started a new group. This one's even worse. Attached were screenshots. A group chat titled Core Maxwell's Only. Clara had posted, Lena's out again. Let's just proceed without the unnecessary theatrics this year. Someone, likely Ben, had replied with a thumbs up emoji and a gif of a skier shrugging. Then the real blow. Chloe's message continued. Your mom asked me if I'd be okay staying in your old attic room, said it was just sitting empty anyway. I read that line twice. Your old attic room. The same room with my grandmother's hand-stitched quilt. The same room with my childhood collection of adventure novels. The window seat where I'd sketched mountain landscapes for hours. They weren't just forgetting me. They were offering up my childhood memories like spare parts. I didn't weep. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and let the cold reality wash over me. Then, I opened my property management portal and logged into the back-end system I now legally controlled. Short-term bookings, owner privileges, guest scheduling. I pulled up the calendar. Only one suite remained unassigned, the presidential suite. King bed, private balcony, unobstructed mountain views. I smiled, a faint knowing smile, and began to type. Guest, Ms. L. Sterling. Arrival, Friday. Length of stay, 3 nights. Then I scrolled to the preferences field and added, Please place a welcome bottle of vintage champagne on ice, guest. Prefers down pillows, cashmere throws, and complete privacy. Click. Confirmation appeared. A notification pinged in my inbox. Their ski week. Booked under my name. The irony was a balm, easing the tension in my shoulders. Let's see how they explained that one to each other. Later that night, I paced my apartment. A glass of red wine in hand, the city lights twinkling far below. I scrolled through years of digital photo albums. Family ski trips where I'd been the designated photographer but rarely featured. Holiday dinners I was too busy to attend, according to them. Birthdays where my thoughtfully chosen gifts arrived by courier, unacknowledged and seemingly forgotten. One particular photo snagged my attention. Clara, beaming as she blew out birthday candles while I stood slightly behind her, a supportive smile on my face. Only my image had been conveniently cropped out of the version shared on social media. That's who I'd been to them. A background fixture, a utility, until my presence was no longer convenient. I thought back to Dad's words, years ago, when I'd finally found the courage to express my hurt. You're just too sensitive, Lena. Not everything is about you. But this lodge, this moment, was about me. Not because I craved their validation, but because I finally held the pen, and I was writing myself back into the narrative. Before turning in, I sent Chloe one last text. Thanks for the intel. Don't change your plans. Just brace for some highly uncomfortable silences. She replied with a popcorn emoji and 3 words. I live for this. The ski lodge was theirs to visit, but the keys? They were already in my possession. There was one suite left to claim, the one with the best view, and the deed. After finalizing the reservation, I didn't dwell on the confirmation. I closed the tab, shut down the laptop, and created distance both physically and mentally. The next morning, I drove south, away from the city, away from the impending confrontation, towards the quiet foothills where Grandma was buried. No grand gestures, no flowers. Just a single, perfect bar of her favorite dark chocolate with sea salt, the kind she used to savor with her afternoon tea. It was a private tradition, the kind that held meaning when no one else was watching. I pulled into the peaceful cemetery just as a gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the old oak trees. Her marker was simple, nestled beneath a sprawling lilac bush. She never liked ostentation, she once confided. Give me sincerity or a good book, something that lasts. I smiled at the memory and sat on the cool grass beside her resting place. Hey, Grandma, I said softly. They're at it again. You'd be rolling your eyes so spectacularly. I let the wind carry the quiet for a moment longer, then placed the chocolate bar by her nameplate and whispered, You once told me not to waste my breath shouting just to increase my leverage. I did. I really did. A few minutes passed. I didn't cry, but I didn't smile either. The stillness had a way of holding you, much like she used to, without words, just a comforting presence. That kind of quiet doesn't come from forced peace. It comes from knowing your own worth, even when others try to diminish it for their own narrative. I stood, brushed the grass from my jeans, and walked back to my car. My phone buzzed before I could even turn the key. It was from the Maxwell family. Chat. A screenshot of the message glared at me. Called dibs on the presidential suite. Feels good to be king of the castle. Let the ski week commence. Marcus, of course. As if the suite was some trophy he'd won. As if he'd built the lodge with his bare hands and not skated through his early career on connections I'd subtly helped him make, while he conveniently forgot to repay a significant loan. Comments followed. Classic Marcus. Ooh, top dog. Claim it before the kids turn it into a fort. I sat with the phone resting on the steering wheel, reading every single comment. None of them questioned it. None of them asked who had actually booked the lodge. None of them saw me. Or perhaps they just hoped I'd remain invisible. Not this time. I opened the thread and typed, That suite is already reserved. Under my name. Hit send. Silence. For a long minute, the chat went dead. No emojis, no witty retorts, no follow-ups. And then, as expected, the private message. Clara. What exactly are you trying to pull, Lena? I stared at her words. My thumb hovered, considering. Then I typed, slow and deliberate. I'm not trying anything. I warned you. You just never believed me. I watched the seen status appear beneath my message. And then I muted the chat, blocked the thread, logged out. Not from anger, from a place of calm, from clarity. Because when you no longer require someone else's validation to exist, you start acting like you own the ground you stand on. And, in this instance, I literally did. I drove back to the city in silence. The roads were mostly clear. Somewhere along the highway, my reflection caught my eye in the rearview mirror. Stern, yes, but softer around the edges than I remembered. Like something tightly wound had finally begun to unspool. Not triumph, not yet. Just certainty. Later. That night, I opened a fresh document on my laptop and began to draft a concise, polite note to the lodge's general manager, confirming my arrival and guest preferences. I wasn't doing it for the drama. I wasn't trying to make a point. I was simply inhabiting the truth. The truth they had consistently ignored for years. The truth that now had a deed, a legally binding clause, and my name on it. In bold. They'd overlooked my name on every invitation for a decade. But this time, they'd have to say it. Out loud. At the check-in desk. The sun had just begun to paint the snowy peaks with alpenglow when I pulled into a secluded scenic overlook, about a mile from the ski lodge. I'd timed it perfectly. Long enough after dusk that the lodge would be alive with the sounds of arrival, voices I wasn't meant to hear. I'd watched their vehicles pull in earlier that evening from my discreetly parked rental, Clara's sleek black SUV, Marcus's ostentatious pickup truck with the oversized tires he thought made him look rugged, and finally my mother's familiar, station wagon, still sporting the faded Proud Hockey Mom sticker on the rear window. They didn't notice me. They never truly had. At 7:15 p.m., I saw them begin to haul ski bags and suitcases, a flurry of strained laughter and self-important gestures. Their voices drifted on the crisp mountain air, slightly distorted, almost foreign. I waited, gave them just enough time to walk into what they believed was still their domain. Then I drove forward, slowly. As I approached the grand timber-framed entrance, I could see Clara at the reception desk, already animated, hands flying. Marcus leaned against the polished oak counter, affecting an air of ownership. My mother stood a little behind them, that familiar tight-lipped expression, a blend of disapproval and willful ignorance. I stepped inside, my boots echoing on the slate floor, just as the young man behind the desk asked again, patiently, "So, you're not on Miss Lena Sterling's guest manifest?" Clara's face contorted. "Excuse me? I don't care what your system says. This is our family's lodge. We've been coming here for over 2 decades." The receptionist's eyes flicked towards me. He blinked once, twice, then a flicker of recognition, the faintest hint of a smile. "Ah, Miss Sterling. Welcome. I was just explaining." "I heard," I said, stepping beside Clara without even glancing at her. "There's no need for any confusion. I can clarify everything." Marcus straightened up. "What is this, Lena? Some kind of sick joke? You really think this is amusing?" "I think it's long overdue." I presented my identification to the receptionist. "The deed was finalized 3 weeks ago. The lodge is mine." The silence that descended was not the kind that waits for a response. It was the kind that cracks the very foundation beneath your feet. Mom clutched her handbag tighter. You bought it? That's impossible." "No, Mom," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "It's legal, it's binding, and it's done. You should have checked the public records, or the trust agreement Grandma left me." Clara spun towards me, her face a shade I'd only seen on frostbitten leaves. "Why would you do this? You knew we were planning the ski week. This was supposed to be our time. And I was supposed to be your daughter, your sister. But you left me off every email, every guest list, every family photo, so I found my own way in." The receptionist looked between us, visibly uncertain whether to intervene or retreat. Marcus let out a harsh laugh, the kind that barely concealed rising panic. "You think you can just throw us out? You think you've won something?" I turned to him, slowly. "No, Marcus, I think I reclaimed something. That's different." Then I looked at the desk clerk and said calmly, "Please assist anyone not listed under my guest registry. Be courteous, of course. They're family." A beat of hesitation, then he nodded and picked up the phone to discreetly summon assistance. Not urgently, just standard procedure, as if this were any typical check-in hiccup. "I'll fight this," Clara hissed behind me. "You'll be hearing from our attorney. You might want to review the clauses on defaulted property taxes and deferred maintenance first," I replied, still facing forward. "You might be surprised by how much was already in motion before you even hit send on your exclusion list." My mother stepped forward then, her voice barely a whisper. "You really despise us that much?" I turned. For a moment, I let the silence hang in the air. Then I said what needed to be said. Not cruelly, not bitterly. Just honestly. "I don't despise you. I just stopped expecting you to change." With that, I walked towards the elevator. The sound of their bewildered outrage faded behind me, like melting snow. As the doors slid closed, I felt my breath even out. Not in relief, but in readiness, because what came next wasn't silence. It was the inevitable fallout. I had just finished brewing a cup of chamomile tea in the quiet of the lodge's private kitchen when the rapping came. Not on my suite door, but on the expansive picture window overlooking the moonlit ski slopes. Not the knock of a fellow guest or a staff member. This one was accompanied by the harsh, pulsing glare of a news van's floodlights. I edged closer, parting the heavy curtains slightly. A man clutching a microphone, sporting that familiar, predatory, camera-ready grin, was already positioning himself for his shot. Another crew member aimed a camera directly at the lodge, at me. I didn't need to hear his opening spiel to know the angle this story would take. The moment I cautiously opened the main door, the reporter's voice assailed me like an icy wind. "Miss Sterling, can you confirm allegations that you manipulated your ailing father into signing over this valuable family property? Sources suggest he was not of sound mind." Behind them, the camera's red recording light blinked, steady and accusatory. I didn't respond with words. I closed the door and walked away. By the time I reached the living area, my phone was vibrating with an intensity I hadn't experienced since the day I discovered I'd been omitted from Grandma's initial will reading. Texts poured in, from old acquaintances, former colleagues, a distant cousin I hadn't spoken to since Grandma's funeral. "Is any of this true, Lena?" And then, the email. "Temporary injunction notice. Occupancy of One Mountain Crest Drive must cease immediately pending judicial review. Violation may result in substantial financial penalties." The pièce de résistance? A screenshot Chloe forwarded. Clara's latest social media post. A person who turns on their own family was never truly raised with love. My heart breaks for her. Family, betrayal, some pray for her. Beneath it, comments bloomed. Fire emojis, sad faces, and "so sorry you're going through this," sending prayers to your family, from people who hadn't known my name 24 hours ago. I stared at it all, the phone in my hand, the headlines already taking shape without my input. I should have been ready, but nothing truly prepares you for being publicly cast as a vulture, especially by people who once bandaged your skinned knees and told you bedtime stories. I didn't cry. Not then. I sat down in the stillness of the presidential suite and looked across the room at a framed photograph I hadn't yet put away. Me, age 6, beaming, holding hands with my father on a ski lift, both of us bundled in, oversized parkas, faces bright with laughter. A time before the silences grew longer than the conversations. Was I still that girl? Would he even recognize me now? The tears came eventually, but they weren't tears of sadness. They belonged to a grief that had aged, hardened into something more weary, more resolute. Hours passed, perhaps more. The lodge was quiet. The wind howled outside, an indifferent witness to the storm brewing within. I found myself wandering towards the built-in bookshelves by the grand fireplace, my hand trailing along the smooth, cool wood. My fingers brushed against something small, tucked behind a row of leather-bound classics. A polished river stone, smooth and gray with a single white band, the one he'd helped me find on a camping trip the summer before Clara left for university. "You deserve all the good things this world has to offer, Lena Bug," he'd said that day, pressing it into my palm like it was the most precious gem he'd ever held. I closed my fingers around it, whispering, "You said that once." But the man who had said those words seemed to have vanished, not present in the court filings bearing his name, nor in the media narrative spun from his daughter's accusations. That version of him and of me had been systematically overwritten. They'd painted me as the villain so convincingly, I almost forgot who I truly was. Until Chloe texted. A simple line. "They declared war. Let's arm you with the truth." And then came the files. Screenshots. Dozens. Family group chats. Private. Email exchanges. Notes passed between my sister and mother. Clara mocking my emotional instability. My mother writing, "She's too wrapped up in her career to care about family. Don't feel guilty excluding her. She's accustomed to being alone." My hands were steady. I didn't gasp, didn't scream. But I felt a thrum in my chest that hadn't been there in days, like air finding its way back into collapsed lungs. So, this was their game. They hadn't just excluded me. They'd spent years methodically erasing me behind my back. I looked down at the Riverstone again. This wasn't the moment I'd been broken. This was the moment I began to write the next chapter. I pulled out my laptop, opened a blank document, and titled it with today's date. Then I started to type the truth, as preserved in digital evidence. What they failed to realize was that the silence they'd imposed on me for all those years had taught me one thing they'd never master: how to endure. Because I had patience, proof, and now a powerful reason. And I wasn't trapped anymore. The morning of the hearing, the sky was a flat, institutional gray. Not menacing, not clear, just the kind of overcast that seemed to sap the world of its color, like it was holding its breath. I walked into the courthouse, a fortress of polished stone and hushed tones, flanked only by my resolve. No entourage, no high-powered legal team in bespoke suits. Just me, in a tailored charcoal gray dress Grandma once called unshakable slate, and a slim leather portfolio clutched in my hand. Everything I needed was in that portfolio. Everything they hoped would remain buried. Inside the courtroom, the air had that familiar, sterile chill I recalled from when we'd probated Grandma's will, a place where families feigned civility, while resentment simmered beneath forced smiles. Mom sat 2 rows ahead, her posture unnaturally rigid. Her eyes didn't meet mine when I walked in. Clara was there too, dressed in a cream-colored pantsuit that screamed expensive, yet looked out of place. She didn't turn, but I could see the tension in the set of her shoulders. Marcus, predictably, was a no-show, probably holed up with a PR consultant. The clerk called the case. Sterling versus Maxwell. Petition for injunction against the transfer of real estate, citing undue influence and exploitation of an elder. The judge, a woman with sharp, intelligent eyes, looked up from her notes, adjusted her glasses, and nodded towards Clara's counsel. Mr. Davies. Her lawyer, young, slick, a little too confident, stood. Your Honor, the petitioner maintains that Ms. Lena Sterling unduly influenced her father, exploiting his vulnerable state of health, which resulted in the unauthorized and unethical transfer of deed rights to the family's mountain lodge. He paused dramatically before unethical, letting the word hang in the air. I didn't flinch. I didn't look at my mother. My gaze remained fixed on the judge's bench. And you, Mrs. Sterling? I rose slowly, unclasped my portfolio. With the court's permission, Your Honor, I said, my voice clear and steady, I would like to present video and audio evidence demonstrating informed consent and detailing family dynamics pertinent to this case. The judge nodded. Proceed. The courtroom lights dimmed slightly as the bailiff cued the video. It was filmed on a sun-drenched porch 2 years prior. My father sat beside me, sipping tea, his voice strong, lucid, unmistakably sound. I want Lena to have this lodge, he said. She's the only one who remembered me after my surgery, the only one who ever asked how I was feeling, not what I could still provide. The camera panned briefly to me. I wasn't crying then, but I was close. Are you absolutely sure, Dad? I asked softly. I'm sure. They always made her feel like an outsider here. She's not an outsider. She's the legacy. Soft gasps rippled through the rows behind me. Even Mom shifted uneasily in her seat, but I wasn't finished. Next, the audio recording, curated and time-stamped by Chloe from just 6 months ago. Clara's voice, sharp and dismissive on a conference call. Let her stay in her high-rise. She was never truly one of us. If she wanted to be included, she should have been more compliant. The judge raised an eyebrow, looking directly at Clara. Clara attempted to sit taller but seemed to shrink within her expensive suit. After a long, charged silence, the judge leaned forward. This court finds no credible basis for the petition. The video evidence clearly demonstrates full mental capacity and explicit intent on the part of Mr. Maxwell. The audio recording, frankly, suggests a pattern of targeted exclusion. Ms. Sterling acted within her legal and ethical rights. She paused, then added, her tone firm. This court is not a venue for litigating long-standing family grievances, nor for validating unkindness disguised as tradition. Case dismissed. Clara froze, her mouth agape. Mom stared straight ahead, her face ashen. I gathered my portfolio and walked out without a backward glance. Outside, the media scrum buzzed like agitated hornets. Mrs. Sterling, any comment? I turned towards them just once. Sometimes, I said, the only way to break a destructive cycle is to walk away, armed with your own truth. The camera flashes popped, but I kept walking, down the courthouse steps, past the imposing marble columns onto the sidewalk, and then towards my car, parked near the edge of the square. There was no applause, no dramatic music swelling. Just the sound of my own steady footsteps and a breeze that, for the first time in a long time, smelled of freedom and mountain air. I paused for a moment at the curb, let the wind whip through my hair, closed my eyes, and just listened. Not for validation, not for an apology, but for the rhythm of my own breath. They had their version of events. I had the truth. And on that day, the truth didn't need to shout. It simply was. As the wind gusted across the high-altitude meadows, I realized the ski lodge itself was never the ultimate prize. I was. By the time I pulled into the long, snow-dusted driveway, the mountain air had shifted again. Crisper, cleaner, somehow more invigorating. The kind of air that didn't just fill your lungs, it reminded you that you were alive and breathing on your own terms. I stepped out of the car and stood for a long moment, letting the accumulated weight of the past few months, the past few years fall away, snowflake by snowflake. The lodge stood before me, bathed in the soft afternoon sun, silent and majestic. For years, I'd driven past places like this, my gaze averted, a dull ache in my chest. Now the keys in my hand didn't feel like a trophy of war. They felt like something more profound, something I'd once misplaced and had to become strong enough to reclaim, a piece of myself. Inside, the lodge felt like someone had departed in haste. A half-finished mug of cocoa on the hearth, a stack of neatly folded resort maps by the entryway. Picture frames adorned the grand stone mantelpiece, photos of Clara's children on various ski slopes, festive holiday dinners, summer hiking trips I'd never been invited to. I stood there for a moment, my hand hovering near one of the frames, but I didn't remove it. I walked past them slowly, my boots making a soft, solid sound on the polished wooden floors, the sound a house makes when it's finally holding its breath in anticipation of peace. Upstairs, the presidential suite was filled with light, the king-sized bed and untouched expanse of white. My name was on the deed, but traces of their presence lingered. In the expensive, barely used toiletries in the bathroom, the lingering scent of a department store perfume, even the generic chill vibes playlist still queued on the smart sound system. I let them be. In the small study off the main room, once Grandma's quiet retreat, there was a low cedar-lined window seat with a storage compartment I'd avoided opening until now. I sat cross-legged on the plush rug, lifted the lid gently, and there it was, the intricate, hand-knitted scarf we'd started together when I was 10. It was a riot of blues and greens, tangled with a few loose ends, some of the yarn slightly frayed, one of my embroidered initials almost invisible. I didn't try to fix it immediately. I sat with it, turning each section in my hands like a cherished memory I hadn't allowed myself to touch for years. I could almost hear her quiet hum in my head, could almost feel the way she would pause to examine each stitch, saying, "Not every imperfect thing needs to be discarded, Lena. Some things just need a patient hand and a little more care." I took it downstairs and spread it across the large oak dining table. Strand by strand, I began to gently untangle and mend it. No shortcuts, no quick fixes, just patience and quiet concentration. The sound of the wind whistling softly through the pines outside the window became a soothing rhythm, keeping time as I worked. The scarf didn't need to be perfect. It just needed to be whole again. Later that afternoon, Chloe arrived, a bottle of good bourbon in one hand and a bag of gourmet snacks in the other. "You didn't think I'd let you settle into your mountain kingdom without proper provisions, did you?" She grinned. We tidied up in comfortable silence for a while, two women who had witnessed the same family saga from different vantage points. We cleared the counters where Clara once orchestrated her elaborate après-ski spreads, exuding casual superiority. We refolded the cashmere throws Mom used to reserve for important guests only. The sheer, exhausting theatricality of it all made me laugh, a genuine cleansing laugh. When we finally settled on the expansive deck with tumblers of bourbon, the sun had dipped low enough to paint the western peaks in fiery shades of orange and purple. Chloe turned to me, her expression serious but kind. "You didn't just win a legal battle, Lena. You unwound it. You unchained yourself from all of that." I didn't reply immediately. I was watching a lone hawk circle lazily overhead, wings spread, wide, utterly unconcerned with the dramas playing out far below. A polite knock came at the main gate about an hour later. I tensed, a conditioned reflex. But it wasn't Clara or Mom. It was Mr. Henderson from the neighboring property, holding a plate of freshly baked cookies. "Just wanted to say welcome to the mountain officially," he said, his weathered face kind. "Your father, He used to talk about you, more than the others. Always said you were the sharp one, the one with grit. I blinked. He did? Mr. Henderson nodded. Sure did. Said you were the one who asked about the constellations when you were just a little tyke. That girl thinks in galaxies, he told me, once. Never forgot that. I stood there, the plate of cookies suddenly feeling heavier than anything I'd carried all week. I thanked him and watched him amble back down the drive. After he left, I hung the newly mended scarf over the back of Grandma's favorite armchair by the fireplace. It draped softly, catching the firelight as if it remembered what it was made for. And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I didn't feel like I was holding my breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Maybe they'll never apologize. Maybe there'll never be a family gathering where someone finally says, "You were right all along, Lena." But that's no longer my cross to bear. I'm not waiting for them to fix the past, or acknowledge my pain, or even admit their part. I've built a life that doesn't require their validation. I reclaimed something, far more valuable than a piece of property. I reclaimed my narrative, my peace, and my silence, on my own terms. I didn't burn the bridge, I just stopped begging for permission to cross it. As true dusk settled, casting long shadows across the snow, I turned off the lights, room by room. I closed the massive front door slowly, this time from the inside. It felt good. What about you? Have you ever had a moment where you had to reclaim your own story or stand your ground in a difficult family situation? I'd genuinely love to hear your experiences in the comments below. I read every single one. And if this story resonated with you, please consider giving it a like and subscribing for more.